they want to use it basically to create a new human society where we look at society in terms of humans, animals, and the environment being on an equal level. So, like, human rights are not more important than anything else, right? So the question is this: are animal rights being brought up all the way to human rights, or are human rights being degraded to the level of animal rights, right? And that is the question, and that's a very important question to ask. And so if we are being corralled into a situation where the banks and other companies really want us to be digitally connected to whatever kind of services we're getting, right, with governments and outside, how can that be used? And more importantly, how can that be misused, right?
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dialogue Over Division. And with me today, I have Lucia Zivcakova. And I hope I got it right there. And I really like how you pronounced it. So if it was wrong, please feel free to correct me. But I have a new friend, Lucia, who we met on LinkedIn. And we were exchanging some messages. And I was really interested in her background in psychology and also the book that she wrote. And so I'm just going to actually turn it over to Lucia, and she could give us a little bit more of a background to who she is, the work she studied, and the very interesting book that she wrote. So go ahead.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Eva. So my name is Lucia Zivcakova, and I studied at the University of Toronto, where I got my Bachelor of Science from in psychology. Then I studied at Wilfrid Laurier University, where I got my Master of Arts from. And I also did 5 years of PhD, also at Wilfrid Laurier University, but unfortunately, I could not finish due to medical reasons.
Okay, and what was that you were attracted to psychology and studying so in depth about in this area?
That's a very interesting question. So actually my theses were on how students learn with different technologies. So I'm very interested in technology and how it interacts with humans. So
Okay.
things like digital convergence, that's a topic that's very, very interesting to me.
So what are some of the concerns that you're talking about in ethics and otherwise that you saw gradually getting more concerning?
That's an excellent question. So some of the things like informed consent, right? We have the right to informed consent, but consent forms are not always provided. And especially with COVID, we saw that, they were giving out an experimental vaccine, and they said it was experimental, but they also said that it was safe and effective. Well, as a researcher, I knew that that couldn't be true because you first have to do the research, and it has to show that it is in fact safe and effective before you can claim it, right? So I saw things that were concerning to me because I was concerned about other people's well-being. And I just realized that that was something that I needed to research further. So I researched multiple different areas of medicine and just saw that there were things that were very concerning.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit to when you were doing your psychological investigations, and I remember doing some of those as well, having participants and the amount of time and effort it took to even before you were able to do anything to get the study going, and then the informed consent and ensuring that that was part of it. So maybe let's go through how that worked in the science psychology field, because I think obviously that relates to what you're talking about in the medical field. So
So that's an excellent point. So basically in university, what we had to do is we had to propose a study, design a study, and then complete what's called an ethics review. that was submitted to an ethics board. And the ethics board, which included a committee of people of different specialties, that would look at what we were planning to do and determining whether it was ethical. And they would give us different hints and pointers of what needed to be changed in order for them to actually accept that study and allow us to run it. So an ethics committee had to always sign off on a new study.
Okay. And what were the things that they were always concerned about that had to, you had to check mark this and this was a no-go? What were some of those things to have an informed consent from the participants?
So the thing that we looked at most was privacy and harm reduction. So if it was harmful, it was not likely to get approved. Also, if there were potentials for privacy breaches, that would not likely be approved either.
Okay. And so then the COVID era and illness and vaccine come along, and then you just start to notice something is off with that? Or was when you said that you started to notice concerning trends, was that before COVID?
Not really before COVID. COVID was the main thing.
Okay.
Because as soon as they came out with a couple of cases, they were saying that it was going to be big and that maybe we were going to face a pandemic.
Right.
Well, we can't really say that unless we have data to support that prediction, right? And they really quickly rolled out the vaccines, and they said that it was an experimental vaccine, but made claims that were scientifically non-substantiated, and that was very concerning.
Okay. And you had this specific concern it was more alert to you because you knew the requirements of getting informed consent for a psychological experiment. And I just find this so interesting because I love watching people's reactions and saying and that's why I found psychology so interesting. And when I went into psychology and saw how much effort and work it takes, as we're talking about, to get that kind of participation. And this may sound silly, but then you see things that they do on television, like the Just for Gags, and they're setting somebody up too. But in those cases, I don't think they're doing informed consent. So for entertainment purposes, they're allowed to put somebody in an uncomfortable position and see what their reaction is for television. And then I think they can withdraw the consent later and say, I don't want to be on television. But they don't have to go through those steps. And yet, when you're trying to do it for research data, science, university, getting your doctorate, all these things, there's such an onerous, requirements on people. And I feel that that's a huge disconnect. Either do you think that what is required at a university level is too much, or is that the right balance, and should that be applied? Is that the right balance? Maybe I'll just end there.
So I think that what the universities are doing is right, because people do need to be protected. What I find is that the law lags behind that, right?
The which? Sorry?
The law lags.
Okay.
So protections, like you said, in public from people doing things for entertainment purposes, where, like you said, they don't have to sign any sort of consent form. Well, that can be looked at and seen as unethical, right? So I think the universities are doing it right, and the rest of the world needs to catch up.
Okay. And so what caused you to write the book Medical Slavery, and give us maybe an outline and what the thesis of the book is about?
Sure. What caused me to write it? Different things that I saw throughout my life. And especially when I was writing it, Roe versus Wade was just being overturned. So it got me to write down some of the ideas that I had. And I just put down basically concerns that I had in different areas of medicine. And then one day I was just looking at it, I'm like, there is something that is tying these together, but what is it? And then I realized it's not something that has been named before. So I decided to name it medical slavery.
Okay.
As soon as I realized what it was that I was talking about, I realized that basically the unifying theme was that even though we have rights to consent, informed and free consent with international law, that is not something that should be taken away from us. And yet we see many different areas where it can be or is taken away. And with that concern, I just decided to write it.
Okay. So I need more.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so first of all, I'll show it to you.
Yep.
It's medical slavery. And if I may, I would really like to thank my editors, Martin Zivcak and Shane Roberts, who were wonderful editors and without whose help I couldn't write this book. So thank you. And I would also like to say a disclaimer, and that the book was written with information that I found on Google and Google Scholar. So I didn't go through professional university libraries or anything like that. So the information, as far as I can tell, is accurate, but it may be somewhat incomplete, or if there's information that was newer, it may not be there.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, I looked at history of slavery, right? And we know what happened in the Americas and how it ended with the Civil War. But we also have what's called modern slavery, and there are two different types. Basically, we have economic bondage or debt bondage, and we have different types of human trafficking, like sex trafficking or organ trafficking and things like that. And with this book, I wanted to illustrate that there's a third type of modern slavery called medical slavery.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, define medical slavery then for me. What is it that you termed medical slavery?
Okay, so I define two types of medical slavery. Type 1 is any type of coercion into having medical procedures that are not wanted, so forced medical procedures. And the second type is wanted or needed medical procedures that are legally prohibited.
Okay.
So, okay?
No, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so basically the whole book is divided into three sections. The first section is category 1, forced medical procedures. Category 2 then is prohibited medical procedures. And my especially favorite chapter is The Future is Here, where I talk about biological surveillance and biodigital convergence.
Okay.
Those are just very, very interesting concepts. Sorry, I hear you.
No, keep going.
Okay. So in category 1, we have things like non-consensual scientific experimentation, which I mentioned COVID in that chapter, and how basically the protection that we have is from international law with the Nuremberg Code, right? Thanks to the Nuremberg Code, which happened as a result of the atrocities that happened in Nazi Germany, we now have protections against being experimented upon without our consent. So having said that, I looked at COVID further and looked into the safe and effective slogans, right? Was it real consent or was consent manufactured, right? If we didn't have enough scientific evidence to show that it was safe and too effective, how can the governments, the media, everybody claim that it's safe and effective? So that was one of the things that I wanted to look at and give people a further in-depth look so that they can make the decision for themselves. Maybe not right now, but in the future, right? For whatever may come.
And did you have other examples in that chapter outside of COVID and the safe and effective slogans?
No, I focus mostly on COVID.
Okay.
That the thing that was happening at the time. It was the biggest thing. There were things that were happening, like, you know, you had to stay away 6 feet from people. Sometimes we were told that we couldn't go places, right? If people were unvaccinated, for example, they wanted passports. They were putting people in COVID hotels. And I just actually saw a report by Rebel News today that the government knew that COVID was spreading really quickly in COVID hotels, but they still went ahead with it, taking people in, knowing that it would harm them.
Yeah.
So it was all of those things that were happening at the time that were making me think, like, wait a second, this is not right. What is happening and why is it happening so quickly? Why are all our rights being taken away? So that was the first chapter.
Okay.
And
And
then,
yeah.
mhm.
Well, I just wanted to confirm. So with on the first chapter, clearly it's about the coercive aspect, and because of the coercion, you're not able to give informed consent is really what
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, that section. Okay, interesting. Anything else that you wanted to add on that chapter?
I would talk about the pandemic treaty.
Okay.
So the WHO proposed a treaty where the governments would no longer have control over a pandemic response, but the WHO would have all the rights and for decision making. And the World Health Organization, as we all know, is not something that is of democratic nature because they're non-elected officials, right? So basically, what happened 2 days ago is that the World Health Assembly signed this pandemic treaty, which gives the WHO the ability to control governments and their responses to COVID. One of the things that they want to do is change what is currently in the pandemic response that says to protect rights to create equity and inclusion. And that, in some ways, takes away our rights because the concern is no longer on promoting human dignity. The
Mhm.
concern is no longer about our rights, but it's being treated as part of a society, and societal rights are now overcoming individual rights.
Yeah. I have an issue with the obviously the undemocratic nature of the WHO. But the other problem I have too with them having that much power in pandemic type situation is it's so far removed from the local area. And I understand you're in Alberta
Mhm.
and I'm in Edmonton. And we have a lot of space, even in like the city of Edmonton. It's still a large geographically, not a huge populace compared to some place like Mexico City, for example. So, how is some organization, which I believe is headquartered in Geneva, going to apply any kind of response to uniformly or in any event to Edmonton, Alberta, and Mexico City at the same time? To me, it's just very absurd in any event. In addition to the undemocratic nature, because you have to look at the local circumstances and situation that we're in, and that's just not possible. There's no connection to the local hospital information and local response of medical staff or anything like that. So I just find that's something I don't think we talk about enough.
Mhm.
So anyway, just something I wanted to add, but really interesting point. And yeah, I saw that news come out a couple days ago, and I don't think it was very, of course, not too well discussed.
Yes, so I totally agree with you. And I agree with efforts to keep people safe, but they cannot come above human rights.
Yeah.
You know, this ethics needs to be there, and individual rights have to be adhered to if we want to make the society better, because societies are made of individuals, right? Protecting individual rights is important. Um,
And one other thing I'm going to throw at you and hope to get some comment from you is something I've been looking at a little bit more is and I had concerns about this whole time, is medical professionals, elected officials, and public officials making generic statements online and basically saying things like, you said safe and effective. Those are very powerful words coming from somebody like the public health officer for Canada or Alberta or doctors. And I think that at some point we have to have a serious discussion about the liability that they have for making those statements publicly and for the harms that are caused as a result of public statements. Can you comment on that a little bit more? When it's informed consent, what are your thoughts and understanding of it has to be made to that person, one-on-one with a medical practitioner or the person that's conducting the experiment in your case?
So you're talking about authority figures telling regular people that what they're supposed to do is take this vaccine and it's safe and effective and don't worry, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, that to me, effectively, from the eyes of a researcher who dealt with basically every day with questions of ethics, that to me is not real informed consent. That's manufactured consent.
Mm.
And in my opinion, there should be legal aspects of, and this is, of course, your expertise, right? I think there should be some kind of, we should be able to fall back on some laws.
Consequences, maybe.
Pardon?
Some consequences, maybe, for, yeah.
Absolutely. People were harmed and people continue to be harmed. There are increases in cancers, as Dr. Marcus would definitely say, there are increases in miscarriages, all sorts of basically disorders and diseases, and nobody is responsible for it, right? It just happened. And the law, as I can see, is lagging behind, right? There's not enough accountability. But that's just my personal opinion.
Well, yeah, and that goes to the class action that I'm involved with, and we're asking those very questions: is who's responsible here? And I think we have a compelling argument about public officials making public statements or should be held to some standard of account. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, I'm with you on that one 100%.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that.
So I'm really interested in the second part. What is this on prohibited but wanted treatment?
Okay, so that's very interesting too. So basically, I have 3 chapters on that. And the first one would be um, gestational slavery. So this goes with Roe versus Wade, as I mentioned, right? So things like abortion bans, prohibitions on what a woman can do with her body, even if it's medically required. Basically, there's some international law that says that gestational slavery, as it has been dubbed, so basically going through with a pregnancy against one's will, there are certain protections for that. The declaration is called Declaration on Violence Against Women and Adolescents and Sexual and Reproductive Rights Protection. So under international law, nobody should be made pregnant against their will. Nobody should carry a pregnancy to term against their will, right? Very basic. Well, that changed
So
when.
this one I might challenge you a bit on.
Mhm.
So when you say nobody should be made pregnant against their will, that can mean a lot. Getting pregnant is one thing. Having sex, if it's unconsensual and forced, that's getting pregnant. Is that what you mean? Or when somebody has sex consensually and then they're pregnant?
So, I mean, in all different types of circumstances, like this is very nuanced, right? So, rape for sure. But even within marital relations, right? If one person does not wish to get pregnant or have a child and the other one does, what do you do? Do you decide on birth control, or do you decide to have a child, even though one of the people, and whether that is the wife or the husband, is kind of coerced into going along with it, right? Is that right? How do
Yeah.
we protect people's rights in these very difficult situations, right? That's why law comes in. It's really hard to make these decisions. And if people cannot make these decisions for themselves amicably, what do we do, right? So those are certain questions that I ask, and I inform people of different types of um, pregnancy-related issues that would make women question whether or not they want to have children. For example, okay, so pregnancy is touted as normal and natural, right? Like this has happened all the time. This is how society goes forward. This is how humanity goes forward, right? It's perfectly normal. Yes, it is, but that doesn't mean that it's without risks, right? And women die due to complications of birth, or even due to complications of pregnancy. And what happens when a woman miscarries, right? So we know from research that most miscarriages happen because the fetus is simply not viable. There is some kind of a genetic defect and it cannot be carried to term. So a woman has a miscarriage, right?
Uh-huh.
That, in medical terms, is called spontaneous abortion. But because the term abortion is used, now that comes under, in the US, the abortion ban, right? So there were cases where women who miscarried and were in need of medical and perhaps psychological treatment were actually charged with a felony and taken to jail.
When was that? Was like before?
That was right after Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Yeah. This is a real case that you're aware of. These are
Yes,
cases.
these are,
Because
yeah,
yeah, I this is again something that I don't know if we're in agreement with on, because I've been recently thinking about this issue a lot, but haven't really talked about this super publicly. Something like abortions and people getting pregnant, and like the example you gave of even a marital couple,
mhm,
is I'm increasingly becoming uncomfortable with politicians and government getting involved in this. And I think we have to really start talking about the root causes of these problems. And if like I think we're getting away from people acting like adults and responsibilities and getting at root causes of things, and we're missing that whole conversation and then talking about I deserve a right to this. And that's where I've landed right now, because of this conversation to me has gone a little bit nutty and it's become so politicized, and I honestly can't even handle listening to politicians talk about and disparage and shame each other about something so personal to a family or a young woman who feels desperate. And I just think that there's so much more to that conversation than the right to her body and her choices.
absolutely. And one of the things that I would add, aside from I completely agree with everything you've just said, is the fact that a pregnancy is a medical condition, right? It's natural, but there's so many aspects that require medical attention that it makes it medical. So if we're going to have politicians telling us what we can and cannot do, shouldn't they also be medical experts if they're going to be making these decisions, right? And those are
I'll just challenge you there. Do you trust all the medical experts given chapter one or part one of your book?
um, if you want an absolutely honest answer, I would say I question medical experts more than ever now.
Yeah.
We all need to make our own decisions, and we need to be responsible for the decisions we make, because whether we like it or not, we're going to carry the consequences of it nonetheless, right? And so we need to be well informed and aware, and we need to do our own research, preferably medical research. But if we don't have the education to be able to understand it, then let's go to some place else which explains it in really simple terms, which is what I try to do with medical slavery. I try to bring in multiple different issues, that talk about things like pregnancy, and say that this is not a clear-cut issue. This should be left up to people to decide, right? Because people have so many different reasons for either wanting to keep a child or not wanting to keep a child. And sometimes it's not even a choice at all. Sometimes a miscarriage just happens, and that's nature. How are you going to legislate what can and cannot happen in nature? That's impossible. That to me shows the ignorance of the people making these laws, right?
Yeah. So, like, I have a hard time believing in the United States, especially that on a medical procedure, that there would be that kind of ban, because in the United States, different to Canada, is they're very litigious. So, if a doctor, is in a position that he has to help the patient, I like that's where, and you're pulling up your book, so I'm assuming you have an actual example, and you're not just saying these things. But that's the one thing, is that there is they can be held liable, obviously, if anything happens. And in the United States, people sue, people get massive settlements. Um, so what was the example that you had?
So one of the examples that I was going to bring up was, and let me find it really quickly, was a woman who had a miscarriage and she was taken to jail. There are other examples of people who basically were ignored by the medical system, even though they were either going through a miscarriage or some kind of a complication in pregnancy, and they died as a result, right? So it shows neglect, because doctors, as you said, are now afraid to do what is right for the person that they're supposed to be treating because of certain laws prohibiting them from doing so.
Okay, and then the one other thing, I didn't mention this before with Roe v. Wade, my understanding is what it just did is said that, like in Canada, the states are responsible for medical decisions, not the federal government.
That's right.
So, yeah, it didn't say outright that there's a ban on anything. It just said that federally, we're no longer going to legislate this. It's up to individual states to make laws about this.
So that's completely right. And many of the states have either accepted many different restrictions on abortions or banned it altogether. And, as an advocate for women and women's health and women's rights, that is concerning when a woman is supposed to be receiving medical care for whatever complications are happening, and instead she's taken to jail and charged with a felony. That does not seem equitable, that does not seem just, that just does not seem ethical or right in any aspect, right? So I think we as a society and we as individuals, we need to look at, well, first of all, we need to inform ourselves of the types of things that can happen, because talking to people about these issues, I find that there's a lot of lack of understanding. Now, I understand that because I went to school for 13 years for post-secondary education, I have a very different perspective than other people. And it may be a privilege because I was able to go to school. I was able to afford it, some people cannot. And I understand that it's a potentially a privileged type of a perspective, but the realities are that these things happen and people need to be aware, right? And so I think every individual has a responsibility to inform themselves on whatever issues they might be facing.
So this goes back to what I was saying, and when you said you agreed with me, and that's where I think that in general as a society we just need to start becoming better informed, being more responsible, taking responsibility for our actions, and understanding that our actions have consequences, because I think as a society we've kind of divorced ourselves of that. because and I don't know if you look at other countries and how they deal with these issues, because I think sometimes in our Western countries we find more problems than we're actually than than really are there. It's like we create our own problems sometimes.
I would agree with your statement. And I would also like to add is that in our current society, with the technological advancements that have been made, and we have social media, and we have this and that, and we have surveillance, there are so many things that are being censored from us so that we are in a position where we cannot make an informed decision. I think that's a real problem.
Yeah. Well, given we're talking about this, and then I think we could move on, but I'd like your opinion too on one thing that never made sense to me too is the day after pill. I forgot what it's called, Plan B or
Plan
something.
B.
Is you can get it, but you have to pay for it, I believe, and I believe that's still the case. And I'm not advocating that it's free, but then if you then are looking for an abortion later on, then that's free. What are your thoughts on though that uh, that like those are medical procedures that are available, but one you pay for, one you don't, but one is a lot more, intrusive, obviously, to the woman and the child. And how do you reconcile that? Because I can't.
So that is an excellent question. So the way I look at it is any kind of preventative birth control should be up to us, right? If we want to make sure, and both, I'm talking about both men and women. So each individual who is having sex should be responsible for taking preventative measures if they want to. So I don't mind that those are paid because they prevent an embryo from forming,
That
right?
we have to pay. And this includes condoms, birth control pills,
Yeah.
all of that stuff.
Yes,
Okay.
things like that. And even Plan B, right? Like the point of that is it's a hormonal, first of all, birth control. And its point is to make sure that ovulation does not happen. So basically to prevent the sperm from meeting an egg.
Okay.
And if it does happen, to eliminate it.
Yeah.
From, right? So that's something that's important and within our control. So we should have access to that. When a pregnancy occurs, because condoms can fail, birth control, hormonal birth control can fail, Plan B can fail, if you're in a position where you're pregnant and for whatever reason, and I make zero judgments about this, I think that's up to the individual to leave. If for whatever reason a woman is seeking termination of pregnancy, that's now a medical procedure, right? I can see why it is covered by the government and healthcare, and whether it's Medicaid in the U.S.
But
or
it's not it in I believe 90% of the cases or more, it's not a medical procedure because it risks the life of either the mother or the child. So you're just strictly looking at the procedure itself. But it's for psychological or social or other reasons that the procedure is requested or wanted.
um. So now we're getting to territory where I would be talking about my own personal views on that. Uh, I would prefer not to go there. I would like to view it from a perspective of medical slavery that tells us that if we're going to have human rights, we need to have choices, right? And if we're forced to do something that we don't want to do, that's medical slavery of category 1, forced medical procedures. And if we want something that is legally prohibited, that's medical slavery of category 2.
Oh, but I didn't say it's medically illegal. But for example, you could pay for it.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you for.
Yeah.
So that's very complex. That's very complicated. There are so many things that come into it, right? It puts it's a preventative measure, right? It is a measure that aims to decrease instances of said procedure, right? Is that something?
Sorry, now I'm a bit confused. You mean the payment of it is meant to? Oh, see, I don't know if I view it that way. So, and I love this because this is why I think it's a shame that nobody talks about this and it just turns into such a political gong show, is that there's so much to this and nobody is having this conversation like adults. And
Absolutely.
I think it's shameful. And like I said, I didn't expect this to be part of the discussion, but I really have just been so turned off by anybody talking about this discussion in a political sphere lately. And thankfully, we didn't hear it a lot in our last federal election, but it comes up so often. And I like, there's so much to this, and nobody really talks about the poor woman that's going through this time, and like, maybe how can we help her? Maybe what's going on in her life. And I find that that's really challenging. So anyway, like, we don't need to keep going into this too, because I do think that this is an incredibly nuanced conversation and discussion, like you're saying, and we could move on to, if you'd like.
Absolutely. The only other thing that I would like to say is that, there are cases where we should be looking at both, like rights of the mother as well as the child when it becomes viable, right? This is another conversation nobody wants to have.
Yeah.
But it is possible to make ethical decisions for both the mother and the child.
Interesting.
And we should really be talking about solutions. And there are very little solutions that are being proposed,
Yeah.
and we need to find them, right?
Yeah.
Then another thing I would like to talk about, for example, is medical assistance in dying. This is in the second part of the book. And I mean, all the things I'm looking at, they're difficult topics, right? So we need to come at it personally, from a point of compassion, I would say, right? And there are some guiding principles that I use within this book that I think need to be applied to every single medical problem we're looking at. And that's one, evidence. We need to look at what evidence is there to suggest one way or another, right? And we need to look at compassion, because if we're making decisions without looking at compassion, then those solutions that we can create can be downright cruel. Now, to me, that's unethical, right? So we really need to to make the best decisions that we can make, both as individuals and society, in my opinion, are best served when we look at evidence and compassion both.
Great point. And I think you made a point that we haven't talked about so much throughout this whole COVID and all this stuff, is individual rights, society. And because it was an all or nothing on one or the other. And it was never a discussion about how those two are integrated. And I think it was evidence and compassion. And I think that that kind of bridges the two so easily. And it was just like, there was no evidence, there was no compassion, there was nothing. It was just like, do as I say, I don't care. And nobody was willing to have that conversation.
I totally agree. I find that in our society, we're being so polarized on many different things, right? Many different topics, and it doesn't serve society. It serves certain interests,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if we're going to look at what's best for humanity, we need to have these conversations. We need to have them openly, and we need to learn how to have them respectfully, right? Because I truly believe in democracy, right? The democratic process. We need to look at individual needs, individual wants, and individual opinions. And then we try to make decisions that protect people's rights, freedoms, and cover the needs that they have, right? In the most ethical way possible. That's the way I look at society and think society should function. That's not how things are currently being done. Currently, things are being very dictated to us. And I find that to be problematic. And I find that to be one aspect of medical slavery.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. That's another topic that I just haven't delved into a lot, the medical assisted suicide. It, like you said too, the topics in your book are so heavy and sometimes it's hard to take on. I'm an incredibly empathetic person too, so I like there's only so much I can deal with these things. But that's one that is, causing me a lot of concern from what else.
And I couldn't agree more with you, you know. I'm a very compassionate person as well, and I'm very sensitive. And so these things, um, I feel, need to really be looked at from the standpoint of compassion, right? So if we look at it from the standpoint of medical slavery, if we force it on people or coerce it or financially incentivize it in any way, that can be looked at as a medical slavery category 1, forced medical procedure.
Uh-huh.
If we completely deny it to people legally, then it could be looked at as medical slavery category 2, legal prohibition, right? Both things take choices away from us, right? So if we are going to look at medical aid in dying from a perspective of our human rights, we need to look at our bodily autonomy, and we need to look at things from what choices do we have and what choice is the right choice for me individually,
Yeah.
right? So the point of euthanasia, as it's also called, is compassion, and it should be a completely um I'm looking for a term and I can't think of it right now. It starts with an A. Sorry about that.
No
Al-
worries.
that's the term. Thank you,
Wait,
Lucy.
I missed it.
Altruistic.
Altruistic, yeah.
So if we're acting on altruistic reasons purely, then we look at euthanasia as something that stops extreme suffering, right?
And I didn't mean to laugh at the situation, but I was just laughing at it's the cynicism in me, altruistic with anything in the medical field right now.
And I would agree with you once again.
I don't know if we see that very much at the moment, given the system and the structure of things and the incentives.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to talk about, right? So this again is a very nuanced topic, right? So if we're doing it from purely compassionate reasons, for reasons of altruism to end people's extreme suffering, I can see why there should be a law that is allowing it.
Uh-huh.
If, however, there are things like financial incentives, right? Or a lot of people undergoing MAID are also donating their organs. Well, that's not free, right? Each organ transplant costs thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and somebody's pocketing that money, right? So is it really altruistic if there are financial incentives behind it, right?
Yeah.
And those are the questions that we need to be asking, basically. Um,
And is anybody having these conversations when you were doing research for your book, for MAID, for the abortion issue? Is anybody having these nuanced discussions?
so I was actually having fights even with my editors because we look at it from different perspectives, right? Because we're individuals, if no other reason, and needed to have these conversations, and they were not easy. And we were people that knew each other very well, that cared about one another, and it was difficult to have these conversations. So we need to really teach children and adolescents and young adults how to have these conversations, how to have them in a friendly manner, respectful manner,
Uh-huh.
yet productive manner, right? Like these conversations need to be going somewhere because we need to be creating solutions to problems, right? And no, actually, to be honest with you, if we're talking about other people outside of my editors, I was shunned. I was told not to talk anymore. And it was just a very hard process. So, if I may say one thing about the book is it is very heavy, and it deals with some of the most difficult topics that touch us today as a society and as individuals. But that's precisely why we need to be having these conversations, because we all have bodies, we all have medical needs, and we all should have rights. And something or another is going to happen at one point or another in every single person's life, right? And we need to have the information that we need to make free and informed decisions.
Yeah.
And so we need to talk about it.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, and we're all individuals living in a society, and we all need to be able to be free and live in that society the way we feel comfortable. Yeah, so really interesting. You mentioned there was a third part to your book too. I don't think we got.
Actually, so it's called The Future is Here, and it
Right.
has chapters. The first one is biological surveillance, and the second one is biodigital convergence. Now, this sounds so out there and so futuristic, right? That what's the point of even looking at it? But the truth is, it's already here. There are patents, there are technologies, there are things that are being utilized or have already been utilized that people don't know about, and they really do need to know about it.
Okay.
So,
Yep. Go ahead. No, keep going.
oh, okay. So the first chapter, biological surveillance. So one of the things that I find there is that there are very few laws that are protecting our privacy, first of all, and that are basically limiting surveillance, right? And this is just in general, right? Like nobody has the right to photograph you when you're, for example, praying or going to the bathroom and things like that, right? That makes sense. But I would like to say that these privacy laws were created before smartphones were created. So they are basically very outdated. And now there is a thing that governments want to talk about, but nobody else wants to listen. So things like biometric fingerprints, iris or ear prints or things like that, that basically identify us as individuals, right? So we're looking at biological aspects of ourselves that are being taken from us, like fingerprints or facial recognition, that nobody's responsible for, legally speaking, but it's being utilized everywhere. Like to open our phone, we have a facial recognition thing, right? So one of the things that I would like to talk about is that the lack of legal protection has led to a situation where these large technological corporations that are eons away from us in terms of advancements and understanding how technology and how human biology works, their research is far beyond our understanding, right? And they're making business decisions that affect all of us. So one of the videos that I cite in the book is of Yuval Noah Harari. Have you heard of him? Yeah, so he's the advisor, or was the advisor, to Klaus Schwab. Well, he has basically stated publicly that COVID was brought in so that people could accept, or that it would be legitimized to have biological surveillance. So not just surveillance on the outside where we go, who we talk to, tracing, who we come in contact with, not things like that, but things that are under our skin. So things like blood pressure, temperature, hormonal levels, and things like that. So that got me thinking. If COVID was brought in to accept biological surveillance, what is the mechanism, right, through which this could happen? Well, if we have been listening to, news that are not mainstream media, a lot of people would know that what has been found in the COVID vaccines is graphene oxide, and that's a nanotechnology. And nanotechnology is programmable, right? It can be infected with a virus, for example, that programs it a certain way to do a certain thing. So, and I know I'm hesitant to speak about it freely because for people that are not aware of this, it sounds insane. And I get it. But if you look at the evidence, again, one of the guiding principles of the book, the evidence is there and it shows that this technology can be used to surveil us from underneath our skin. There are no protections. So there's so many questions that come from that, right? Who is in charge of this information? Who collects it? For what reasons? What are they going to do with it? How can they use it? How can it be misused? What are the military applications of it, right? Like, this is so huge and nobody's talking about it, mainly because nobody knows about it, right?
Well, that, and I think everybody's scared to be labeled yet again a conspiracy theorist, because they were excellent at doing that for the last 5 years too. You step out of line or question something. So I actually just love hearing information, whether or not it's nutty or not. I think it's healthy to have those discussions rather than silencing and shaming people for having those discussions. I talk about this all the time. It's about elevating the conversation. If you were a total nut, and everything was nutty, then society can determine if we were educated and elevated in having those discussions. I like, we are free to make as many crazy statements as you want, in my opinion, and I think we should all be entitled to, um, and allow society to make those decisions ultimately. So I think more maybe that's the reason, is it's just such a, people are just so hesitant to say anything anymore, and I find that shameful that that's what it's come to. Of course, what you're saying is incredibly uh, out there and concerning.
But actual. And I have so many references. I have over 200 references in my book. So what I am saying is accurate to the best of my ability to determine. So I was looking at, scientific articles, patents, things like that to determine what is actual
Mhm.
happening and what is not, right? Um, so one of the things I would say, if
One thing I just wanted to jump into, just to give it a little bit of context, because you said the law with privacy, I think, needs to catch up, or something.
Mhm.
And just to give you some context of, like, I think these are not, I don't think you are, what I'm suggesting is that you don't look for the law to change, but you have to talk to the politicians to change the law. In that, right now too, if you want to sue someone in Canada, you still in this day and age have to do it personally on them. So you have to deliver a piece of paper individually to a person. And back in the days when people lived in a house, stayed in a house for a long time, it was a lot easier to do that. But now you have people moving all the time. You have anonymous people on the line, on online, saying things, and you can't serve somebody through the legal process initially unless it's done with a piece of paper to their home address. And that's how, like, that, 10 years ago, this should have changed already, something like that, where like we have to get a little bit more with the times. And you're talking about like digital surveillance, and the legal system is still so archaic. So I just wanted to highlight that for you.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you. We need to catch up as a society, ethically, morally, legally to the technology because it's advancing at lightning speeds, right? And human rights are being forgotten with that technology, right? And it's just it's literally scary. Um, so I'm not somebody who's scared easily, but when I see what is happening, the level of suffering that can come from this is terrifying, like literally terrifying, right? And so we need to talk about these things. We need to, it doesn't matter how futuristic they sound, they are already here. There
Uh-huh.
are patents, for example, that allow Microsoft specifically has the patent. And sorry, my chair is really squeaky, and I like to move around when I talk.
It's not the chair. Sometimes I can hear you with your hands, actually.
Oh, sorry. Um, I don't know if I can
You
do that.
are moving. You're animated. It's okay.
I am animated. This is very important to me, so I am very animated. So I apologize for that. But as I was saying, you know, it's something that we need to talk about whether we like it or not. We need to talk about it whether it scares us or not. We need to talk about it whether it hurts our feelings or not, right? If we don't, there will be many negative consequences that can happen. So the patent I was talking about,
Yeah.
Microsoft patent that can use biological activity like skin conductance, for example, to mine cryptocurrency. How mind-boggling is that, right? They
I
want to
don't even understand all of it, but it doesn't sound great, is what I was going to say.
exactly, right? So now we're getting into the second chapter, which is biodigital convergence. As a lawyer, I'm sure you know that the Canadian government is basically saying that we're at a point in our human evolution where we can combine the biological with the digital. Now, let's full stop right here. That's terrifying to some people for religious reasons, ethical reasons, all sorts of reasons, right?
Mhm.
So they want to bring in the digital ID, right? If you don't have a digital ID, you will not be able to access banks, for example. Now they're selling digital tattoos that include your ID and all the information about you as a superpower. So basically, you're going to be able to go to a bank, swipe your hand like this, and authenticate. They're selling that as a superpower to young people who
Mhm.
are impressionable, right? They already have technology that is wearable, like hats or headbands, that literally measures your brain waves, and they can tell a lot of information from those brain waves about you. Um, there's all sorts of microchips that they're proposing. I saw a video where a woman was saying that they're going to put microchips in pills so that we can swallow them easily, and they're going to have control or surveillance over our whole body's functioning. I went to a dairy farm about 15 years ago, and all the dairy cows had chips in their ears, right? And we were looking at the monitors of what they were looking for. There was heart rate, there was blood pressure, there was temperature, but there was also hormonal information, like when they were in estrus, when it was best to introduce them to stud, right? And they want us to be able to, and when I say they, I mean certain people who are creating this technology, right, that have for profit stake in this technology. They want us to be able to ingest medication that has these chips so that they can tell all of these things about us. And also, for example, to say that, well, just as an example, you're legally required to take a medication for whatever reason, right? And that happens in the Mental Health Act, right? They will be able to know for a fact whether you took. So, is that an invasion of privacy? You know, these are the questions that we need to be asking right now. We need to catch up to the technology legally, ethically, and in every way.
Yeah. And I am with you that I don't think this conversation is happening a lot in Canada as far as I could see. There is some conversations I've seen in the United States, in and around Silicon Valley, obviously, because I think that there's a lot of interest there. Um, it was I had heard a podcast and the words were the organic and transhumanism, and they were talking about how um, right now is that's actually, and no, I don't see anybody else really talking about this, but that's the balance that Donald Trump in the United States is dealing with almost on a daily basis. um, and so what are is your thoughts and on that subject right now? Because again, I don't think we're having this conversation enough. Obviously, I think organic is very interesting, and I think we could have a whole discussion on just this one topic. But
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
that a lot of things are happening that are happening too quickly. technology is so advanced, we are so far behind, we are losing rights because they're not even losing. We didn't even have them because if there's no legislation of any kind to protect our rights in this biodigital convergence era, we can't even say that what they're doing is wrong or illegal because nothing says so, right? There's no legislation that says so. So basically, we don't have any rights when it comes to transhumanism whatsoever. And I find that very concerning. Again, compassion, right? We don't know what's going to happen when they're going to microchip people. Could it cause increases in cancers, like around the site, you know? Another issue is Elon Musk has a company called Neuralink where they want to put a brain chip implant into people. It was at the stage of animal research. And the animals, according to certain reports, were suffering so much that the federal government decided to investigate the company for animal abuses, for animal torture, and things like that. What is going to happen when they put it into people? We have zero idea of what could happen to humans. They could die, but if they survive, what are the other things that could happen? Sorry. I find this really difficult to talk about because I find it terrifying, right?
Uh-huh. Well, I do think they have put it in some humans now. So there's some human data, but not a lot, probably.
But I can't find anything to confirm it. So it is just out there, right? Like, are they
What do you
doing?
mean you can't find anything to confirm it? That it happened, or?
So I hear rumors of it, but I don't have anything, for example, from Neuralink company to show that they're doing that or any data that they might have or anything like that. So it comes basically down to point: do we want to have human rights? Is this something that's important for us as a society? Is this something that's important to us as individuals, right? Klaus Schwab, for example, is talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Have you heard about that?
I think so, yeah, but remind me what it is again.
So it's basically transhumanism. They want to connect people through nanotechnology that is injected into us, that may or may not have been injected to us through COVID vaccines, that basically connects us to a computer network, maybe to the internet as well. And they want to use it basically to create a new human society where we look at society in terms of humans, animals, and the environment being on an equal level. So everything is like human rights are not more important than anything else, right? So if we're being, so the question is this: are animal rights being brought up all the way to human rights, or are human rights being degraded to the level of animal rights, right? And that is the question, and that's a very important question to ask. And so if we are being corralled into a situation where the banks and other companies really want us to be digitally connected to whatever kind of services we're getting, right, with governments and outside, how can that be used? And more importantly, how can that be misused, right? So one of the things that I would like to talk about is if we are forced to get this technology, and now under the pandemic treaty that has been accepted, there is a provision that calls for forced medical procedures, right? That they're going to be legal, basically. I'm saying that's slavery, category 1, right? So if we're literally going to be grabbed and injected with something against our will, that's slavery category 1, medical slavery, right? But what happens if we take it? We take this technology willingly and we give free consent. But then we do something that is not right. Perhaps we make a Facebook post that is deemed unacceptable, and we're told you cannot use your bank account. right? They disable your chip.
Mhm.
Have we seen this before? We have seen this during the COVID era when they basically blocked people from accessing their own financial accounts, right? So that would be, in my opinion, and especially if, like, accessing the bank is important, but you're probably not going to die in the next day, right? But what if you need a life-saving medical procedure,
Yep.
like organ transplant? What if they can say, well, you don't have a chip, or you have a chip, but you've done something wrong, so now you can't get that life-saving procedure? Again, have we seen this before? Well, yes, we have during COVID, where a doctor in Canada has declared that unvaccinated Canadians are not eligible for receiving organ transplants. So
Yeah.
basically, what is this judge saying? He's saying that the right penalty for not being vaccinated is death,
Yeah.
right? Like, that's literally what he's saying. How is this going to be used and misused later on?
Well, and that's another nuanced discussion too, because there are already some requirements, and not everyone gets an organ. But and I'm not defending it, but that it's, all of these things are so nuanced, and I try to have talk about how we can change, what we can do in order to not have a bleak outcome. So maybe can you take us there? What is something we can do as society, and what are some of the things that you're saying, let's look out for this, or how can we
That's an
prevent madness?
Thank you for asking it. So, as you say in your book, right? Empower people to be informed, to be more aware. And once they are more aware and more informed, let's do something about it. Let's get involved, right? So I consider the book as an action call to medical professionals, to legal professionals, to ethical professionals, and basically anybody else who cares about this, who cares about their own health and the health of the future generations, right? And the rights of future generations. So, in my opinion, everyone can do something according to their expertise or according to whatever skills they bring to the table, right? Everybody can do something. And I think we really need to look at it and do it.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that 100%. If we elevate the conversation. And a really interesting component that you said too is that we all have something to bring to that
Mhm.
conversation. And I think that sometimes people get hesitant to have the conversation because they feel they don't have the expertise or the knowledge, but yet they have so much personal knowledge and concerns. That's another thing, just expressing your concerns about this. Really interesting, Lucia. I really didn't think it would take on such a difficult tone as well, but like you said, important conversation. So I think that this is something we need to keep doing, and maybe inspire others to have these difficult conversations with their friends, family, and more so elected officials, because those are the
Yeah.
ones making the decisions at the end of the day. Um, Lucia, where can people find you, get your book, all that stuff?
But they can go on Amazon, and basically you just put in my name and the full title of the book. You cannot use just one or the other because the book is not yet well known enough to come up. So if you use Lucia Zivcakova, Medical Slavery, it'll come up on Amazon, and then it's pretty cheap. It's $22 right now.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for starting that conversation here in Canada. Although it's difficult, thank you for having it and
Thank you
getting
for having me. I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity to have this conversation. Thank
my
you.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks again. And I'll still steal you for a few more minutes here with a paid X subscriber.